Hello, everybody. As you can tell, we have a little special show for you today. My guest, Niko House, the founder of MCSC Network. He is one of my favorite people in Left New Media. Definitely one of my favorite Black hosts in Left New Media. And so we're here today to talk about a lot of different topics. Our time is limited, but first. I know a lot of people in my audience already know who you are, but just give people a quick, run through explanation of the work that you guys do at MCSC and yeah, what you guys have been doing over the last couple of years.
I would like to consider us activism media. That's because that's how I started as a journalist. I was an organizer and an activist, and then I just happened to get a radio show and carry that activism over into the media world. Same thing with Fiorella, same thing with Pasta, and same thing with Johnny. We break stories from the ground. We do a lot of investigative journalism as well. We try to give an objective synopsis of what's going on in political discourse and try to kind of help people understand what they're seeing. Because I think that, a lot of people are getting fed a lot of information at once. And it's hard to decipher what's true and what's false and who's a good actor and who's a bad actor. So we try to do our best to help people, siphon through all that.
Yeah, I think that's a good explanation of what you guys do at the network. And real quick to add on that, I think that is an important role that new media has, because it's one thing to do the on the ground reporting and present the facts to people, but a lot of times people don't have the context of our political climate and our political system and how things have been working over the last few decades. So I think the role of people who do the news now, it shouldn't just be, okay, here are the facts and I'll let you make your mind up. There's a role for that, but where we are right now, I think it's important to give people context about how we got here and the solutions to fix the problems.
I can't think of a better example of that than when people, I tell people that I'm not voting for Joe Biden, and they can't believe it. And you're like, well, what are the other options? I'm like, see, that's not a question you should have been asking me today. That's a question you should have asked me 2-3 years ago. And if I gave you the options, would you actually engage in those options? Because, we're not even just talking about third party voting. It's like, did you do anything to push ranked choice voting in your city or in your state? Did you organize and educate people on what was happening on the ground during the primaries and try to direct the energy in the right direction? And there's a lot of different things that we could do. And those things weren't done, which is how we ended up at Joe Biden versus Donald Trump.
I hear you, completely understand. Now, before I get to the first topic, let me just let people in the audience know, depending on how long we spend on different topics, I might break it down into separate videos, but I will be uploading the full interview, and then later I'll decide if I want to break it up into separate segments to make it easier for you guys to watch. Now, to the first topic I want to talk about, which is the elephant in the room, if you will. We are in the worst emergency in U.S. history, and we're in an economic crisis worse than the Great Depression. It's the worst economic crisis in history. So as somebody who's been covering this crisis since it started last year, I still have a hard time trying to adequately put into words the severity and the gravity of the situation, because the numbers are off the charts, and nobody could have even imagined a scenario like this if you would have presented it to them before. We have 60 million people who lost their job in less than a year. I believe that the highest amount of people who filed for unemployment in any year in history before in a given week was about like 600,000. And since March last year, it's been around 1 million people filing for unemployment every week. So we talk about these numbers. It's hard to put it into words. And then you have the lines outside of food banks. You have the 40 million people about to be evicted. So what are your thoughts on the overall situation and this completely unacceptable response from the government?
Once upon a time, I would have been surprised that we were here. But given what I understand about the government, At this point, I'm not surprised. You would almost assume that the failure on behalf of the government was actually done on purpose on behalf of the corporations, because the ones who are about to profit the most are the ones who are going to be able to buy the stock back for cheap, buy this land back for cheap, put their franchises in their their department stores or in their little shopping districts up as millions of people get evicted from their homes and lose their businesses. I think it's something to the degree of 1 out of 4 small businesses have been closed, and half of those are never going to open again. And I'm sure that number has gone up since. I think that it's largely due to the fear mongering and then the subsequent lies told after that, right? They say that we can't do anything because we don't have any solutions, but we have solutions like ivermectin out there, hydroxychloroquine and zinc. We have interferon alpha 2b. These are medicinal solutions that countries in Africa, Central and South America have used. Cuba especially is probably the best example I could think of. They basically effectively defeated the virus. They're back to business as usual because they didn't just fear-base and then not offer a solution, or fear-monger and then not offer a solution. Like, for example, with us, it's you got to stay locked down. You got to quit your job, or your job is probably going to make you quit or fire you because they just can't afford to stay up because nobody's shopping. And oh, by the way, like, we're not going to give you any help, really. Like, they gave us minimal help at best. And so what that did next is make people desperate enough to take whatever comes next, which is a vaccine that, to be quite frank, just based on the scientific method, is not safe. Just, people, there have been adverse reactions to it. Like, there were like 29 cases in California, where now the officials out there are calling for it to be just say, we can't do that. You got to take it back to the lab. 20, it's either 29 deaths or 29 people who got sick right after, within hours. And that's just natural because we couldn't figure this vaccine out before. So, like, you can't convince me that in 6 months we're able to figure it out. But the money behind it is why you saw a 6-month push, which is that Pfizer and biotech, which is basically the same company, they got $2 billion to push that vaccine out. And when you get $2 billion from the government, it's about getting results, not necessarily making sure it's safe. And so instead of focusing on the solution that we had and making sure that we could get those out to people, which, by the way, all those solutions could be, for the most part, administered preventatively. So you don't have to go through the suffering before you get taken care of. So we didn't focus on those, didn't allow them to get out to the people to the degree they should. And then on top of that, you see a vaccine fast tracked, and now they're saying, oh, actually, we thought it could prevent the spread, but it probably can't. So you still have to stay on lockdown. You still have to suffer financially. You still can't get a job. You still have to put your life on pause. And the government has been instrumental in, like I said, just perpetuating the cyclical failure of dealing with this crisis. It's just over and over again. And obviously, I don't see that getting any better with Biden, considering he's already backtracking on the 2000 that he promised, and the Democrats are letting him get away with it. So, unfortunately, I hate to say we're on our own in a lot of ways, but we're kind of on our own here. Take advantage of whatever little bit the government does give you, but at a certain point, it's going to take direct action to get what we need in order to save this economy.
I agree with you on definitely on the direct action, and I'm going to get more into that later on in the interview. But my thing with the because it's hard to discern about the virus, and it's hard to have for me at least, it's hard for me to take a concrete position on, like, the medicinal treatments and things like that. But for me, what is and the pandemic is attached to the hip with the economic crisis. And you can't talk about one without the other. But for me, it's because the economic side of it, that's the easy part. That's something that could have been handled very easily, very simply, very swiftly, and very efficiently. And if we needed to do certain lockdowns, people wouldn't have to worry about losing income. People wouldn't have to worry about losing their house. People wouldn't have to worry about not being able to feed the family.
If you're going to do government mandated lockdowns, you should do government mandated assistance. Absolutely.
Exactly. And then there were other ways that they could have handled it where, like in other countries, some of them, they did targeted shutdowns of places where the spread of the virus would have been it's more than other places.
It was more concentrated.
Yeah, it's more concentrated. Or like the wearing masks indoors, all these different things. There have been other countries have been able to take care of it, but another thing that I want to really get into,
I think it's because those countries are not using the virus or seeing the virus through a lens of a profit motive. And that's the difference. That's why they're actually doing objective research. The research is founded in solid evidence and solid observation, whereas ours has been skewed. I mean, remember how they were demonizing hydroxychloroquine and zinc in the beginning of this just because Trump took it, and then CNN had to come out with an article later on saying, "Oh, our bad. Actually, this stuff actually was better than we originally thought." And then nobody, but the stigma is still attached to it. So once again, we understand now that the stigma is only attached to it because of the financial gain that the insurance companies and the pharmaceutical companies could get, and so they were lying and skewing the methodology and the data, and that's why the other countries are doing better, because and even a doctor from Cuba actually said that. He's like, or excuse me, was it Cuba? No, I think it was a Venezuelan doctor actually. But he said on an interview in RT that like he said the United States could have dealt with this far quicker than any other country. They just chose not to.
And then one more thing about this whole handling of the economic crisis. The initial response, the CARES Act, of course, unmitigated disaster, worst corporate bailout in history. But has been hard for me to wrap my mind around is the spectrum of debate as to how we go further, how the government is supposed to be dealing with it, because they successfully managed to confine the debate in this extreme between extreme right-wing positions of we're going to do absolutely nothing, or we're going to give people $600, or like how Bernie Sanders is like, oh, we'll give people a one-time means tested $1,200 check again, like we did not 10 months ago.
Yeah, and you're saying they limit. It seems like they're going out of the way to purposely limit the parameters of debate. Like instead of saying like when we say like, nah, we need actually comprehensive assistance here, they're like $2,000 checks, and then people rally behind that. It's like, you mean $2,000 a month? That's what I'm on. That's what I'm thinking about. They're still talking about $15 an hour. I'm saying, once again, we say livable wage because right now it should be closer to $20 to $25 an hour. When the moratorium, there shouldn't be a debate. There should be zero need for congressional debate over this moratorium. Once again, if you force cities to close, then you are the one who must be obligated to take care of those cities. What the hell are we paying taxes for? It's supposed to be a quote unquote social safety net. Where the hell is the safety at? I see the net's over there for the corporations, right? The corporations got grants while small businesses were forced to apply for loans based on the credit that they received during the pandemic, which probably isn't that good because of the pandemic. So it's not a complicated situation, but you're right. I've said this the other day on my show. I was like, you see that they are limiting the parameters of the discussion to $2,000. Yeah, man, maybe $2,000 in March of 2020 would have been fantastic. In addition to like the $1,200 that we received prior to that. But like, bro, it was March of 2020 or April of 2020 for some people when they got that. It's the end of January. This is about 2 more months. And it's back to and some people still haven't gotten that check. You feel me? Like it's crazy how they limit the parameters of this discussion, and people just kind of like fall for it. They just fall for it uncritically, and then cheer on people as if they've done something commendable by saying, hey, let's debate about giving them $2,000 of their own money in the pandemic during a lockdown that we forced on them. Like, no, you're lucky that people didn't storm the Capitol earlier than that, based off of just that concept alone, like just denying people their money. There shouldn't be a debate. It should be the people get to vote on this because it's our money to spend.
Right. And now let me move on to the next topic, which is forced to vote. I had to talk about this because this was really a defining moment for the left. And because people like you and me and Jimmy Dore and Fia and Pasta at the Convo Couch and this small section of left new media, when we've been calling them sellouts and tools of the establishment for a very long time now.
Yeah, we had a
And every
conversation
time we do it,
when I first came to
it's,
the show. We talked about that.
yeah. And every time we do it, there's always there's always enough wiggle room. To me personally, I don't see it. I think it's all excuses. I think it's all bullshit. But there's always enough wiggle room that the most prominent defenders of the squad and AOC, they can always try to make some type of bullshit excuse and justification for why they did whatever they did. When it was calling Mama Bear, Nancy Pelosi Mama Bear, oh, it was just one time. She just said it in an interview and you guys are going to nail her to the cross over it. Or, oh, when they voted for the CARES Act, oh, I mean, it was going to pass anyway. So, of course, we had to like, is it a problem that they voted for it?
To give ICE more money after saying defund ICE. Remember that?
Yeah, when they do all those things, and we say they sell us, we say they're tools of the establishment, and they're never going to buck the establishment in ways that matter. When we say the thing, they always have all these excuses. But for us to vote, there is no excuse. There is no, oh, they didn't have the votes. They had the opportunity to stand true to the rhetoric that they've been spouting off for years now about how they want to bust up the establishment, how they want to run out the corporate Democrats, how they want to bring about social democratic change and address wealth inequality. Okay, they all had the opportunity to oust the person, the Speaker of the House, who wrote the CARES Act. They all had the opportunity to oust the Speaker of the House, who's been blocking Medicare for all in the middle of a pandemic for almost a year now. They had the opportunity to oust the person who has been blocking UBI for almost a year now, and they chose not to do it. They on purpose chose not to do it. And when they did that, they were defending the status quo and they were siding with the establishment once again. And there is no debate about that.
Siding with the establishment.
So what do you think about the whole forced to vote movement?
So siding with the establishment is an understatement. And so this part I talked about on my show and I've talked about in several interviews, but people don't really know it because there was this belief, rightfully so probably at the time, that there was no way in hell McCarthy could win, right? Even if the squad did abstain or voted for someone else, like there was no way that McCarthy could win. That's what everybody thought. But also it seemed like in the background, a bunch of other Democrats had their own little vendettas against Nancy Pelosi, where some, before they did the recount, 53 had either abstained or voted for someone else. No one was expecting that. So now the squad is put in this very, very unique situation, an unexpected situation, where Nancy Pelosi and McCarthy only needed 214 votes to win, where Nancy Pelosi, we know, won 216 of those votes, crossing that 214 threshold. Ladies and gentlemen, AOC Barbara Lee and Cori Bush had 3 abstentions. They literally held Nancy Pelosi's balls, figuratively, in their hands. And the hands of the entire Democratic establishment were tied to those 3 votes. Because if they abstain and don't go to Nancy Pelosi, McCarthy already hit the threshold. Therefore, and he actually hit it sooner than that, because if you take away those 3 votes, so she won 216. So you take away those 3 votes, it lowers the threshold to 211. And McCarthy had already hit that. McCarthy actually won in the first round of voting if they didn't go back and count the abstentions, which they don't always do, but because the establishment didn't get what they want, of course they did. And so is McCarthy, would he be a better Speaker of the House? The truth is, it would be a push. What's the worst thing he could do? Not pass Medicare for all in the middle of a pandemic, or like not even take it to the floor for a vote. If that's the worst thing he can do, then what's the difference between Nancy Pelosi and McCarthy? At least under McCarthy, we know that things would probably maintain. In other words, because it would be a Republican Speaker of the House with a Democratic majority, maybe nothing gets done. But we've seen what happens when shit gets done when the Democrats have everything. People forget the worst policies in history weren't necessarily passed with the Republican majority, right? The 94 crime bill, the Telecommunications Act, which effectively led to the monopolization of media, that was all under Bill Clinton. And yeah, you had the Patriot Act under Bush, but that's because a Democrat wrote the Patriot Act for him. And the Democrats led the charge on Iraq. The Republicans obviously had they role in it, but people like Biden helped to push that and whip Democrats over for that. So they're going to do what the Republicans want every time. But when the Democrats come in, they do what the Republicans want, but faster, and make people cheer for it.
And let me say something about the because the whole point of it wasn't even to make Kevin McCarthy speaker.
It
The
wasn't.
point of it was to
Nobody thought that was a
use
possibility. You're right.
yeah, the point of it was to use the leverage to threaten Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats because it was just a fact. There was no way around it. They could not have confirmed the Speaker of the House without the Justice Democrats voting for them.
Yeah,
So the whole point of it,
100% fact. Anybody saying otherwise, it maybe before it would have been like that, but because of how the circumstances ended up, they could not have won without the squad and the Justice Democrats.
yeah, and so that makes it so much more infuriating because it was all up to them, and they had the chance, and they folded, and they didn't do anything that they said that they were going to do. And so for me, like we're at a crossroads. I think we've been here for a while, but now it's undeniable we're at a crossroads because the people. There's still some people who's still trying to convince us that we need to support progressives running the Democratic Party, and that's the only way forward. But we need to reconcile with the fact that not that oh they get elected and they try and they fight and boy they have some knockdown drag out fights, but they end up losing at the end of the day. We elected these people. They have the chance to do something. They had multiple opportunities to show if they're going to do anything to fight for the policies that they ran on. And they on purpose choose not to do it every single time. They choose to go with the establishment. They go with the path of least resistance. And so what's the point of having them there if they're not going to do anything that they ran on?
No pun intended. The path of least resistance, just ironic considering they call themselves a resistance party. But there's no point in it because like people pretend as if we expect them to just snap a finger and enact policy, right? That's not what we're expecting. We expect you to use your mandate, right? We understand that like your most powerful asset as a congresswoman or a congressman is not, as a progressive, I should say, is not your ability to or the number of votes that you can use to influence the outcome of any given election or any given bill. But it's because of your mandate to get the entire country paying attention at the most important times where it's imperative to do so. I remember Tulsi said that you'd be surprised at how many people will change their votes because they get a bunch of phone calls and a bunch of emails. But like it may be to us, it seems unimportant because maybe they're in the same district, but she's like, it only takes one bad headline for shit to go south for these people, and they know that. Sometimes people don't catch it. But when a bunch of people are emailing, a bunch of people are calling, it takes 1, 2, 3 interviews in a local newspaper that gets taken to the major network that gets taken to Twitter that goes viral. And next thing you know, you're on the hot seat and you just lost your seat to Jamal Bowman out of nowhere and you thought you were safe, right? Like that's all it takes. And so people have to be aware. But when we look at what happened with Forced to Vote, they were not only not trying to push the conversation towards Medicare for all, they were trying to crush the conversation and even
Yes.
that people who are demanding accountability for them were like trafficking in violence, like by just speaking about the fact that they were acting like sellouts because they indeed were. What's even more disgusting, I think, is the fact that AOC, when talking to Justin Jackson on Twitter, said basically there was no point, we can't get it passed right now, therefore we shouldn't do it. We don't have the votes, et cetera, et cetera. And we gave the reasons like, yeah, but we know that this could lead to further developments. We don't know actually where they're going to vote because we are in the middle of a pandemic. It's unprecedented. And we don't know how many people are willing to vote against Medicare or healthcare in the middle of a pandemic whenever the Democrats agree 90% that we should have one. And then Fox News viewers also think 70% of them think we should have it. So like, who's going to be the dumbass to vote against healthcare in the middle of a pandemic?
And that's such an important point because when it's hard to quantify how much of a fuck up this was.
I want to hold that thought, Kyle. This part's important. So after she tweeted that at Justin Jackson, she then goes on Twitter to defend, because somebody's like, well, why would you vote for impeachment and waste time on impeachment if it doesn't matter? Because it's not, the Republicans said, we're killing it. What the hell's wrong with y'all? We're not even entertaining this shit in the Senate, right? Okay, so she goes on to say, well, it's important because we need to get a vote in this historic time to make sure that the people know we did everything we could to fight. We need people to be on record because a co-sponsor is not necessarily the same thing as a vote. Voting record does matter. So she uses that exact same excuse to defend wasting time on impeachment that she knows is going to fail, but had opposite remarks when it came to force to vote. She's
Right.
like that. She's not a genuine actor. She's worse, actually. She's scary because she's convinced people that she is.
Yeah, like this whole idea that, oh, she's just so naive and they don't know how it works. No, these are calculating politicians, and they all gather together and they all get together with their staffs and they all come up with how they're going to you think they didn't strategize on how to handle forced vote? You think all the Justice Democrats didn't talk about that after the huge pressure from the left?
The way they behaved, like on Twitter, and they were in sync. It was almost like they actually talked to Cenk and Anna as well, and Sam Cedar, because when they flipped on forced to vote, it was almost perfectly timed right behind the time the AOC came out and said she wasn't going to support it.
Right. And then so like it's hard to quantify how big of a fuck up it is because you can't, because the missed opportunity, the opportunity cost. They had the chance to make huge advancements in the fight for Medicare for all, because a public debate, a knockdown, drag out fight on the floor of the House, where you're going to make everybody come on the record and say, are they going to side with their corporate donors in the for-profit private health insurance industry over their constituents who are dying in a pandemic because they don't have health care? And they were dying at 68,000 people were dying every year because they couldn't afford health care before the pandemic. Mm-hmm. And all these people, 500,000 people going bankrupt before the pandemic every single year. So you would have forced a debate where everybody would have been on the record, and doing that, you don't, like Jimmy Dore made this point on his show, and it was such a great point. You don't know what could have happened after that. You could have sparked a whole other round of direct action, and it could have been people outside of their houses and people outside of their offices protesting because they're on the record making an argument that they're going to let their constituents die for the campaign donations. So and nobody knows how that could have changed the debate.
I think that's the reason it would have passed. People, because because of what you just said, it's almost like getting to the discovery stage of a major lawsuit, right? Or a major a criminal case. It would have been public. Oh my God, the hearings for that would have been insane. There would have been content for days to just cover the excuses. It's either going to be an excuse or you're going to grandstand. And I would be willing to bet money that in the middle of a pandemic, you're likely going to grandstand. And so if you're going to be the one to vote against healthcare in the pandemic, you're probably going to lose your seat and be torched for the next year. And then we saw precedents for what something like this during a time like this and how you get what you want. During the civil rights movement, there was the civil rights amendments were introduced once before Lyndon B. Johnson signed it and Congress passed it. Guess what? It failed. The country was absolutely appalled at the behavior of Congress when they failed the first time. That's what that major activism movement, that major direct action that we began to see that eventually led up to things like the Million Man March. That is what eventually persuaded Congress, even the Dixiecrats and the Southern people who are the ones who are mainly, demanding that segregation be maintained. They all ended up switching over. That's how you get shit done. It's not by putting more people in who agree with you. No, because they can just convince you that they're doing the right thing or we're trying to do the right thing. And because you like them because they agree with you, you think that you confuse that with being a good politician and an honest politician. It's not the same thing. You got to it's cool to have people in there who agree with us and who will fight for us and who will advocate for us. But damn all that, you need to put yourself in a position so that you don't have to rely on corrupt elections to get what you want. It's putting pressure on the people who are there to get what you want, because right now they all feel like they don't have any pressure. And that's why they're just continuing to screw us over every day.
And that's the point I make on my show a lot. When you get to Congress, all the pressure, you have the entire weight of the establishment coming down on you to make you conform. And
hold on, your sound went out. Your sound, I can't hear you. Whoop, whoop. I can't hear you.
Oh, froze?
Yeah. No. You weren't froze. Your sound went out for a second.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know what that was.
Yeah, there needs to be
pressure. There's more pressure.
Yeah, there needs to be pressure coming from people on the outside, on the ground, pressuring them to stay true to what they ran on. And so that leads me to the next thing I want to talk about, which is direct action. There's this there's this strain of thought on the left that, oh, we didn't get them this time in this election. We got to wait till 2024. We need to wait till 2028 or 10, 15 years from now. And then maybe the Justice Democrats will have a majority in the House and the Senate, and then they'll get a progressive president elected. And then we'll get Medicare for all. Like, that is so removed from reality. Yeah, like that type of plan. It's so removed from reality. And it completely disregards the fact that we are, like I said, the worst emergency in U.S. history, and we need Medicare for all right now. We need UBI right now, and people don't have time to wait for it. People can't wait for the next election. People can't wait for the midterm elections.
I know, right?
40 million people about to be evicted. So, like, we need to move the conversation away from primaries and really electoral politics. And it's not to say that electoral politics doesn't have a place in politics, because it's unreasonable to expect there to be massive direct actions and general strikes anytime we need any policy change. So later down the road, of course, there's room to talk about third parties and things like that. But right now, I think the focus needs to be on getting people assistance so that they can make it through the day. And so what are your thoughts on direct action and trying to get the policies we need right now?
I think I've been preaching that for years, honestly, since I've got into this. I've been saying we can't pretend as if electoral politics has ever been what saved us. Like, people don't even realize that. Electoral, it's better for you to damn near not engage in politics rather than you engaging exclusively and only in electoral politics, because then you inadvertently have potentially a direct hand in furthering a lot of the problems that already exist in this country. Direct action is how we've got, for example, equal rights for marriage. That wasn't an electoral political decision. Do you know how that happened? That happened because people went to the Supreme Court and fought for their goddamn rights with direct action and the means that they had available to them. Interracial marriage, that was direct action, once again, going to the Supreme Court. Abortion rights, direct action, once again, in public pressure, leading to the Supreme Court case where it was eventually overturned. There's example upon, the Million Man March, they weren't marching to the fucking polls. They was marching on Capitol Hill. You know what I'm saying? Like, and if shit went south, that, it could have got ugly fast. And obviously in many protests of the civil rights movement, they did get ugly. And it was in the fear, because it wasn't just we're mobilizing, they're going to go back home. Like, no. It was mobilization and then action, not direct action just against the government, but also direct act. The people who were mobilizing against the government were mobilizing and organizing on behalf of the people, setting up food drives, making sure people had jobs, making sure people had a place to sleep. Like, this is what we have to get back to. I truly feel like they understood direct action and the dynamics between the people and the government, and how they weaponize us against each other and use propaganda to further weaponize us against each other. Like, they understand that because they also they dealt with humanity every day. So it wasn't just going to scream at the government, but it was dealing with humanity to remind them why they were fighting so hard against the government. And you have a lot of screaming at the government, depending on who's in office. That's usually how people depend on who they're going to scream at, but they're not actually in the trenches dealing with humanity at the same time. So a lot of the times they forget why they're even screaming. They just fall into this culture shift that we've seen, where it's like, oh, it's just cool to be politically active and pretend like you know more about politics than you actually do. But it's not cool to get into the trenches and be with humanity, see what's going on, organize around helping, and organizing around fighting.
I agree with that. And then one last thing on the point I want to make about direct action before I go to the next topic is, so on my show, I did a video maybe a couple months ago, where because people were asking me to talk about mutual aid and programs like that to assist people. And of course, I support that, and I support helping people who need the help in your community right now. I support that. But I think my view on that, similar to how my view is on charity in general, is like, that doesn't get to the root problem. So I do think that there needs to be you need to marry the two. You can do the mutual aid and have people come and give people food or money for the utilities or rent or whatever and do that stuff. But when you're doing that, also provide people the option to say, hey, and it's not like, to say, hey, I know you need help and you're here, we'll provide you the help, but also we're organizing and we're going to be outside of our congressperson's house. We're going to be outside their office. And we'd like you to be out there, and we'd also have food and supplies out there if you need it too. So,
and
it's not like
out there too. So you get free food, and we're going to organize to make sure you're not in this situation ever again.
So I think that needs to be the conversation around mutual aid and direct action. We need to view them as things that are linked together.
And people would argue, because to play devil's advocate, people would say, well, people want the mutual aid to be separate from politics. I'm like, but at a certain point, bro, you can't pretend. You know what I'm saying? Like, let's stop pretending like this shit isn't political. Everything's political. Everything. Yes. And but the problem is when you pretend like this is explicitly perpetuated, these problems are explicitly perpetuated or propagated by one party or the other. That is what you really mean by
it's the partisanship.
In other words, you don't want that side to come and bitch at you because you support this side. That's what you don't want. So stop supporting the sides because they're not on your team, they're on their own. That's the conversation that we need to be having. And I appreciate you. I catch a lot of your videos, and you've been one, and it's probably once again, I think when you're Black, I feel like you also see things through a little bit of a different lens when you're not like entrenched in this horse race that we call American politics, and your career isn't relying on it. It gives you a different lens, and I feel like that you see when. Based on our history, like whenever someone's trying to play us and they're just giving us lip service, and then you can take that and help other people see the same symptoms and deal with that from an objective perspective, not based on a partisan one. So I appreciate that, and I think we need more of it. I hope you start putting out some more content regularly.
And until last topic. It's actually piggybacks onto what we were just talking about, which is the current state of new media, because it's been crazy. Because before I started the show over 2 years ago now, I like most of the people in my audience, I watched a lot of new media, and there was a lot of people who inspired me to do what I do, and there has been a very big divide, and it's been there, but it's unavoidable now, and it needs to be addressed. And there's no room for people, their ego, and like, oh, they're my friends, so I can't say anything about them, even though they're objectively wrong, on the wrong side of some of the most important issues, whether it's Russiagate, the CARES Act, the force to vote, all these different things. Like, all right, at Julian Assange, at some point, you have to call it out, and we need to air out this dissent, because I'm seeing there's this unspoken rule that nobody in new media is allowed to criticize each other, and because we all agree on Medicare for all, so anything they do is fine. We agree on the important issues. We agree on Medicare for all. Okay, well, that was tested, and apparently, when the time came, we didn't all agree on Medicare for all, because there was a large portion of new media who was actively arguing against forced to vote.
We didn't agree on. So we agreed that that Medicare for all should be the first, second, third, or healthcare in general, single payer healthcare should be the first, second, and third concern, not your love for your favorite politician and protecting their career. That's what the difference was. Some of us were worried about healthcare. The others were worried about their favorite politician because they already have healthcare.
Right, and like that's an important thing too. So there is this new era in new media, and before it was dominated entirely, left new media was dominated by people who were doing fine financially, and they might agree or like the policies that the left supports, like Medicare for all, UBI, and free college. They agree that those are good policies, but their lives weren't dependent on it. It wasn't do or die for them. So there was always, and it's not to like say they're bad people for it, but there's a lack of urgency when you don't have everything on the line depending on these policies. But what I'm seeing in this new wave of new media is there are a lot of people who are just regular people, regular working class people, and they do provide a different perspective, and they do know what it's like to be struggling to pay healthcare or financially. And they do bring this urgency to new media. So what do you think about that?
Say that last part again.
they bring this much needed urgency to the discussion in new media. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, you know what? I'm extremely happy to see it because it's I feel like I've been lonely out here, to be real with you, because that's how I got involved. I mean, people know, a lot of the people who follow me know that like I was actually homeless for a while from doing what I do, and I gave up law school on a full ride to damn near any school you can think of in the country. Um, I would have been making at like 24, 25 years old. Well, 26 I would have been by the end of by the end of 2016. I would have been 26. So I would have been 26 years old, making like 300,000 a year going to law school because I had the army paying for it, but I also got full rides. And but I saw after working on the Bernie Sanders campaign something that looked irreparable if we didn't start working on it now. If we didn't start building up the voices that we need to build up now, if we didn't start getting educated in policy and politics now, then a lot of people are going to suffer. And yeah, I would have been fine if I would have just pursued law school. But instead, I started the DNC fraud lawsuit with Jared Elizabeth Lee Beck. I started my own radio show, or I got invited to start my own radio show on iHeartRadio. And then that converted into what I do now. We started the MCSC network full of people who also have suffered, through similar circumstances. And we are now seeing the growth, in my opinion, of media heads that have dealt with these issues in one form or another. Richie Medhurst, another great one who has family in Syria, is Syrian himself, that has constantly had to deal with what we do in Syria. Fiorella being a Latina immigrant, and Johnny, their producer, who's their little brother, their parents are Peruvian refugees that came here. They eventually got citizenship, but that's how they got here. They were victims of imperialism. So they're very, very focused on imperialism and how that affects people's families in ways that people don't see unless you know somebody. Because not everybody tells their story like that, right? Pasta himself has had to deal with a lot of issues too, work relations, labor stuff, and all that stuff is kind of like, it's given us this drive that we are uncompromising because we don't know how to compromise when it comes to these issues, because there's no excuse. There's no excuse. We don't need to compromise on medically. What the fuck is a compromise? Now, there's nothing, don't reach to compromise. There's nothing to reach for. There's nothing. Everybody deserves healthcare? Yes or no? 100%. Can you pursue happiness without health? Absolutely not. Can you be health? Life, liberty. Can you have true liberty? Can you have true autonomy without your health? No, you are a slave to this your health and in this market, this healthcare market, and you damn sure obviously can't pursue your life without healthcare. These things this is an inalienable right by definition, and if you are in a position where it's not that important to you, it's because you already get to enjoy that right. And people who have been in positions where major issues are not important to them, just like the white liberals, the white liberal moderate that MLK refers to in what I think it was his letter from Birmingham jail, I want to say, where he talks about the white liberal moderate. They're like, man, it sucks, that they're segregated, but shit don't affect me, so I'm fine. And he said those are the most dangerous ones because they'll be the ones who make all the money off your struggle, but won't lift a finger or step a foot, to get out and fight for you. So the people that are here doing this, I know it sounds crazy, but they just got the low quality equipment. I started out with my iPhone 6 and my headphones. The presentation that you see now, that's years of grinding and trusting the people to provide. If I'm consistent in what I do, and I stay honest, do I make as much as some of these bigger channels like maybe Sam Cedar or TYT? No, not yet, but we're growing steadily. Our audience is loyal. And I feel like a lot of the channels that are similar to ours are like that. Your channel, my channel, Convo, the ones who really truly started from the very, very bottom with no help, not being a part of a major network like TYT, is a different type of loyalty that you get from staying true to the craft and staying true to your roots here. And that's a unique quality of people who have gone through something and that's what's driven them to get behind this camera and talk shit every day about this establishment who's oppressing most of us.
All right, and one last question, because you've been very generous with your time. This one is about imperialism, because I had to talk about it. Can't have you on and not talk about endless wars. So it's been over a year since the Afghanistan papers dropped. And basically everybody all forgot about that. Nobody talks about it anymore.
I was talking about that the other day, actually. But yeah, basically.
Yeah, and it's stunning because we learned the worst possible things you could ever learn about your government in that they were lying about the longest war in U.S. history, and they were lying about civilian casualties. They were doing, honestly, like in Afghanistan, just like they do in all these other wars, they were doing genocide for profit. They had no objective. They were just there dropping bombs because that's what the defense contractors in the military industrial complex who give them campaign donations. That's what drives their business. So it was genocide for profit. They all admitted we have no idea what we're doing, but we're still dropping bombs there anyway, and we're going to cover up all the crimes we're doing while we're there. And then, of course, the prosecution of Julian Assange for his publication of the Afghanistan and Iraq war logs over 10 years ago now. And so all of this ties into the incoming Biden administration, because a lot of these people, there's in characters who got us into these wars and have lied to us about the entire, all throughout. We've been in Afghanistan since 2001, so almost 20 years now. And so what do you think about this state of acceptance and complacency in this country, where literally the worst thing you can possibly do on this planet as a human being, genocide for profit, it has just become just accepted policy in the United States?
I mean, it's historically accepted policy in the U.S., right? Native Americans still have not received the reparations they deserve. Genocide for profit here is the norm. It's not the exception. But what we saw, what we are seeing right now, isn't that surprising when we have a guy who, I mean, is largely responsible for what we saw in Afghanistan and Iraq, but also can be a segregationist, can be a sex pest, can be a racist, can be a warmonger, can fail all the way up into the most powerful position in the world, even to, for people to believe that he's the solution when he's been part of the reason that we got Trump, who they hated so much, right? And people just accept that, right? They cheer for it even. That's why we are not hearing anything about it, because they go with the news cycle. If people like you and myself don't constantly put attention on what took place, what we learned in those Afghanistan papers, what we learned about Russiagate and how that was bullshit, what we know about election fraud and election integrity problems, like if we don't talk about it, nobody's gonna care. And so that's why we have to continue to talk about it. I'm starting a documentary series, just kind of bringing focus back into these issues that seem to slip to the wayside. Like our next one is going to be on CAA. We're doing a 10 to 15 minute mini documentary, just breaking down how CAA affected the elections and their history of corruption. And talking about like just the difference between Rose McGowan, who has always had issues with CAA. They've dealt with. Harvey Weinstein was a major CAA player, so like that's the type of agency it is. And then on the other side of that fence, her former colleague Alyssa Milano, once she signed a CAA, all of a sudden she went from Me Too to vote for Biden and tried to clean up his record. But these are things that people don't think about, and if you get caught up in the news cycle, it's easy to forget about them. But we have to do as a unit, right? We just all have to do a better job of not letting these issues get away from us, just trying to keep up with the news cycle.
All right. Thank you, Niko House. Tell everybody where they can find you.
You can find me on Twitter at Niko, NIKOCSFB, but you can also find me on YouTube at MCSC Network with Niko House. You can find me on Rockfin, which is the preferred method to hear me, because you're always going to get the notifications, get those emails at Rockfin, ROKFIN.com/Niko, NIKO.
All right. All righty. Thank you very much.